Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, an education on human interest show on the effects of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, brought to you by someone with both professional and living experience with FASD. And this show is for anyone living with fetal alcohol, loving on someone, or working with someone who has fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or anyone just wanting to learn more. Because hopefully you are hearing about FASD more and more and more out in the public square. So for those of you who have been long-term listeners or viewers to the program, you will see Dr. Kathryn Page is on the mic again today. And today is so very special because, drum roll, today is 6 months of bringing you this podcast. And to celebrate, and I'll repeat this in a couple different places, the first 3 people that send me an email to livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com saying, yes, I want in, I will mail you a copy of my book. And Dr. Page is also featured in the book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with people diagnosed as adults with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or FASD. So again, to celebrate 6 months of podcasting, be one of the first 3 people to email me, livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. And you will, if you're in the States, because postage out of the country is just way too extravagant. If you're one of the first 3 in the States who write me, I will send you a book. So without any further ado, Dr. Page, Kathy,
thank you,
welcome
Patti.
back.
Thank you, Patti. And glad to be back. Wish I could see the faces of whoever might be present.
Me too.
But we'll just imagine. I know, wouldn't it be fun? But
It would.
Imagine who's out there. And I'm excited about this edition because Patti has graciously agreed to be interviewed by me about her impressions, her experiences, her what it's been like for her to be doing this podcast, what she has gained and learned, the high points. Maybe there's been a low point or two, although, you know, she's awfully good at this, and so probably not too many kerfuffles. Plus she gets to edit. So kerfuffles get edited out for the most part.
They did when I was audio only.
Oh.
I have done no edit. What? Jock, go away. My dog is saying forced love. Yeah. So which means the puppy is hitting the same hand from below. So I have 2 wet noses on my hand.
Oh.
So yeah, I have done no editing since we switched to video format.
Where you?
Right, because tech is not in my wheelhouse when it comes to the way FASD affects me. I can try something a couple times, and if I can't get it, I walk away. And I tried a couple different programs to edit video. I tried so hard. And the one, because supposedly it's easy now that you can use AI, right? It pulls up the transcript, you edit the transcript, and the video magically adjusts itself.
Wow.
Well, the one program I tried, the transcript never appeared. I was like, okay, there's enough competition, I'm out of here. And I tried another program, and every time it spliced the video, there was a flash of white light.
Woo.
And with the particular guest that I was trying to edit, there were so many flashes of white light that I thought, I can't do that. Someone's out in the audience, someone watching on YouTube or Spotify is going to have a seizure with all these lights flashing.
Right.
So it's unedited. It has been since week 8. Which is why it's such a good thing that I had already subtitled the podcast Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper, because they're very candid.
That's it's funny. It was one of the questions I was going to ask you, and I still would love for you to dip your toe back into
Sure.
the part about how your own brain,
Yeah.
fetal alcohol affected parts of your brain, how
Yeah.
they have shown up in this experience for you.
Yeah.
First, I have to say before you start that my connection here is not great. The light keeps, going in and out, for which I apologize. And also, Patty, you freeze every now and then.
Oh
So I
no.
have,
Okay.
I apologize to those out there being distracted by all this, but we'll do the best we can. So back to you, Patty.
Okay. So I just closed out my web browser, so hopefully that will help my connection.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the lighting's not bad. It's just that one window is awfully bright. So that's better. Okay. So I would say, as far as how has my FASD been showing up in all this? I've known you, Kathy, since you collaborated with me on Sip by Sip, right? For those of you who have not picked this up yet, I tell 10 stories, 9 of them through an interview format or a conversational format with other adults living with FASD. And Dr. Page is one of those who so graciously gave of her time and of herself, and allowed herself to be vulnerable in that way. And it just led to such a beautiful friendship. And which is why I invited you to join the podcast with me and be part of it. And I'm always so tickled when I can have you back on, because we have such a good time together. But if you recall, one of my FASD things is very common, and that's shiny new object syndrome. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are going, yeah, me too. It's a lot of us struggle with that. And in my case, the editing process for the book became so overwhelming. This podcast became the shiny new object. I had been thinking about starting it after the book was done, but instead I started it about 2 months before the book was done, because I needed the break from all the stress related to editing. Yeah. So when I write the next one, I'm not going through that same place, because I still can't figure out why I paid for editing when I did it all myself.
That raises a really, really interesting point, Patty. The point being that our brains, different though they may be, share a bunch of sort of core patterns. And
Yeah.
one is that it's probably fair to say about all of us, although maybe not, but
Most of us anyway,
that there's 2 sides to the coin. There's interference and impairment and disability and stuff that we'd rather not have, but there's also aspects of it that, if we can manage well enough to keep the chaos at a low roar, those aspects can bring sparkle and activity and action into our lives.
Yeah.
So for you, the fact that you got kind of bored with the editing and overwhelmed with the editing and needed a little break, and along comes podcasting and adds a sparkle. And, thank goodness you have that shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. And it wasn't boring, editing the book wasn't boring, but it's proofreading is not in my skill set. Right. Ask any of my supervisors that I've worked for over the years. They send stuff back to me to fix. But the editors at the book company, they didn't send stuff back to be fixed.
Right.
And I had to keep stumbling upon things that needed to be fixed.
Yeah.
And to the point where there's something that I really would like to change, but my last email saying one more thing has gone unanswered.
Uh,
I'm out of free fixes. And so I am going to say, just for full disclosure and disclaimer, one of my statistics in here is on the number of people impacted by FASD. I conflated two populations, the total US population versus the adult US population. So I had said the number of adults living with this is 16.6 million, but that's actually our, or the number, that's like all of it. People living, not just the adults living with it. So it's 15 plus adults in our country living with FASD. So
is that 5% of the population, Patti?
yeah, because you can, when you pull up the census stats, you can pull it up by total population or adults or children, or they have some weird range in there also. And so when I was doing the math and crunching it, 5% to get the number with FASD, and then 0.01% to get the number who were diagnosed.
Yeah.
Or times 99.9, which is the number who have no clue why they're suffering in life, right? But I had crunched the wrong number. So there's my full disclosure and disclaimer. And of course, I was horrified when I realized what I did, but it's just, that's part of how I roll. I have to double check and triple check everything.
Right.
And I did that a little too late.
And another part of how you roll that I've noticed is that you are scrupulously honest.
Yeah.
Is that you operate with integrity, which means that if there's a detail that you got wrong somewhere, you're going to own it and fix it and be honest about it.
Yeah, because I don't want to be accused of trying to deceive anybody or to try and exaggerate things.
Right.
If you've ever lived or worked with someone who exaggerates, it can be very frustrating. I don't ever want to be that person. And I definitely don't want to be that person for my readers. So, there's is still 15 million plus people is still enough to blow anybody's mind. So it certainly didn't need to be bumped up for the point.
Exactly. And actually it's one of the things that I think you and I have talked about over time, that our field, fetal alcohol, we who live with it are so conscious of the magnitude of it, of like, it really is kind of everywhere out there. And as it operates in us, to have it go unrecognized for so long has just been, well, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of healing to get to the point that we're, doing okay. Yeah. Because there was a lot of years where the blame and the shame and the, oh, you're just an idiot, or you don't care, or you're just, thoughtless or lazy. It so takes a toll, and it feeds into a lowered energy. Yeah, for sure. Into what looks like laziness. So it's this self-perpetuating circle. So So
that triggered another thought for me, and that's that I seem to have this theme of having this battle come up, right? With the diabetes, type 1 is only 5% of all diabetes, and so there's so much misunderstanding based on that. They share common symptoms, but the etiology, the cause of it is different. Therefore, the management is very different. And it's extremely exhausting and frustrating and frankly shocking that, today, when I'm 60, children are still being sent home from the emergency room. Oh, it's just the flu. Seriously? No, check their sugar. right? And then caring for my mom these past 4 years, she's got Lewy body, which is the second most common form of dementia, but it is the number one misdiagnosed form of dementia.
Wow.
And it takes most patients several years to get a proper diagnosis.
Mm.
You look at Robin Williams. He never did get the proper diagnosis, and he took his own life because of it.
Yeah.
And here we are again with a third very serious condition that is not recognized, even though it's freaking everywhere. You know,
Right.
1 in 20 people. Well, how many people do you know?
Those of us that have suffered with it.
Yeah. How many people do you know?
Well,
you know more than 20 people.
All of these people who are kind of charming and friendly and get jobs easily and then get fired easily, and who take things personally and who get upset over little things and can't manage time, money's kind of hard, in ways have judgment that is that of a much younger person. And I speak from experience here that automatically pops up a little curiosity in me when I start to see that, especially where there is the appearance of normalcy. And then there's like screw ups that you don't notice right away, usually. So I always ask, so I really just kind of wanted to highlight, I think, for a minute there, how your point of the shiny object syndrome illustrates that there's ways in which this brain serves us and serves the world. And I think the excitement about doing the new thing, even though it's frustrating to us and everybody else when maybe our follow-up isn't so great, although yours is great in this case. I was saying earlier how much I admire your discipline at keeping this going. It's just wonderful. But
I wish I could have this discipline in all areas of my life.
Well, wouldn't it be wonderful?
Wouldn't it?
But we get to benefit from the fact that you have it in this area.
Thank you.
Let me ask if there's any particular high points as you look back on your podcast interviews.
On the first 6 months, right? Yeah, I think originally you had phrased that question, which is your favorite episode? And I would have to say my answer is going to be very similar to the other podcasters like Natalie or Robbie when they're asked this question, or Sandra when they're asked this question, whichever one I'm recording at the moment is my favorite. I get excited about all of them for different reasons, because the value that each has contributed is so distinct one from another, and so also important. And they all, I've clicked with every guest that I've interviewed one way or another. And so 6 months in, and it is all still very fresh and invigorating for me. And keeps me going through the more routine or even stressful aspects of my life. So I don't know how fair the question is, because anyone listening, if I were to single out an episode, would be like, oh, why wasn't it me? I don't want to do that to anybody. So yeah, I mean, every week tends to be my favorite. And I've really tried very hard to mix it up, right? So I was looking at the numbers, at the who is it that I've had on, and I'm going to cheat and look at my cheat sheet here. I've had 9 adults living with FASD, 4 parent advocates who are working in the FASD space in various fields. 2 of them are podcasters. 1 is with a national organization, and 1 is a diagnostician, and then 10 professionals. So I'm mixing it all up, and I try try to mix up the order in which everyone appears as well, just to keep it very fresh. But I've enjoyed my time with every single guest that I've had. I've formed a camaraderie and a solidarity with those who are living with FASD, and those working in the space as well. I mean, and that goes to me having both living and professional experience with FASD. Yeah. So did that answer it?
Oh, no. No, it did, but it leaves me trying to find a way to ask you that you actually will pick something out. And let me try this.
Good luck.
Well, how about this? Is there anything that you can think of that you've learned in particular? Not just in general, I've learned a lot from everybody. I always learn something. But is there something that was a surprise to you in some
You
way?
know, yes. And although it shouldn't have, Susan Rich surprised me a few weeks ago when we sat down and recorded. We were talking about the history of alcohol and therefore the history of FASD, because the two go hand in hand, and will continue to go hand in hand, right? And she had mentioned being at a conference and having one of the presenters, I don't know if it was Ken Jones or who it was, but somebody had referenced a particular writing, a particular doctor, and he was a eugenicist. And she said, alcohol has, the eugenicists that were so popular back in the 20s and 30s were fighting against prohibition because they wanted all the liquor stores around lower income and minority communities so that would be weakened, right? I mean, they just came across as being very Aryan. And it's like, so my social justice warrior came up. And really that shouldn't have surprised me, because there are other things that remain in our society that had their origins in the eugenicists of that age.
Patti, some
And
of our listeners might not know what that word means. Could you
so,
define?
yeah, so a eugenicist is somebody who believes that basically everyone should be white, and just eliminate everyone else one way or the other. And so the way or have them all be menial, if not slaves, at least be menial. For instance, in this paper that had been referenced, and she shared a bit more about it, the eugenicists of the day were saying that women should not raise their infants within their bodies, but they should all be, humans should be raised in laboratories. And if you want a baby to be, in management or whatnot, you don't give them any chemicals whatsoever. If you want someone to be working in a factory, and then you add alcohol to what, give them FAS, basically, along with other chemicals, so that they can just go about their business without ever thinking. So, because if they're not thinking, then they're not going to question, and they're not going to assert themselves, and they're not going to stand up for their rights. Right? So their idea was that at various points in the pregnancy, you would add various subjects, or substances, but alcohol was always one of them, to basically disable their minds.
That is fascinating, and
Yeah.
certainly did not become the prevailing
Thank God.
organizational principle. Thank God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that I wonder if still thinking in terms of your experiences doing these podcasts, was there one or was there one that brought up that was difficult for you, that brought up anything in the way of pain or confusion,
Well,
or
I
like,
left that
what do I do now
question.
with this?
Yeah, I left that question blank up until yesterday.
Ah,
I was able to fill that in. Um, in my, I recorded yesterday with Dr. Jared Brown again, because he is so knowledgeable in so many different areas that he makes like the perfect recurring guest. Um, and I will always be very indebted to him for his generosity in sharing his time and his knowledge and wisdom. But we were talking yesterday about sleep, and that being such a prevalent issue within our population. And really it's a universal issue, right, to have struggles with sleep. But it's a two-part episode. It will air in mid-December. Here's my plug. It'll air December 16th. And I'm going to share both episodes in 1 week, maybe even in 1 day. I haven't thought that one through yet. But yeah, so this episode's going to be aired first because next week is 6 months already. Anyway, in talking about that, we got on the topic of self-care.
mm-hmm.
And you, among many other people, have been on me about taking care of myself, because I am doing so much, right? I have a 20-hour job that always seems to take up way more than 20 hours a week, doing foster care, which that is so stressful, particularly for the kidlets on my caseload now, just enormous amounts of stress. My TMJ is acting up. My jaws are sore. These teeth are very sore. I think I've been grinding them at night. I haven't slept well.
Just to clarify, Patti, just to clarify,
Yeah.
when you say doing foster care, some in the audience might not be aware that as a social worker, not as a foster care provider.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
are
So,
managing
and
the well-being
yeah.
of others.
And that's what led me into FASD in the first place, was trying to explore what will make me a more effective supporter for the kids on my caseload and the families on my caseload, because nobody understands these kids. And so of course they're very frustrated and acting out, right, their frustration and their pain over and over and over again. And the more they do that, the more they get moved, which disrupts attachment, and it's a vicious cycle that it's a downward spiral. And then the foster homes, they're not adequately prepared. Adoptive parents are not adequately prepared. During pre-service training, they may be told a child's going to act half their age. And then that's dropped. So there's no discussion about dysmaturity. There's no discussion about, well, and so you do what with that knowledge? And so it's just, I'm doing what I can within my space, with my agency. I'm taking them all through an 18-hour neurobehavioral training. But 2 hours a month or 2 hours every other month, it's taking a long time, which leaves me frustrated and keeps the cycle going, right? Anyway, so I'm doing that, trying to record other trainings that I can sell to my agency for the time that I'm no longer there, like pre-adoptive training, so that their parents can be more ready. So I'm trying to do all those things. I'm a hospice chaplain, part-time, which is very part-time, which is a good thing. That's a service people have to opt in within hospice. And I'm caring for my mom full-time. We have 11 animals that need care. And of course the house. So all of those things. And you and several others have been saying, please take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself. And, I'm juggling. And it really slapped me upside the face yesterday when I was recording with Jared. Yeah, my TMJ. And yeah, I've been aware of that. Not sleeping well. I've been aware of that too. My pain conditions are flared up because stress activates that. And that's not a problem during the day when my mind is busy. But once I lay down, there's nothing to distract me from receiving those messages. So it's, yeah, that's an area where I, like so many of my audience, need to remain attentive to.
Well, it sounds like you don't have a lot of choice. Like so many in the audience, there are givens.
Yeah.
There are things that you can't eliminate.
Yeah.
And especially for people that are raising, that have fetal alcohol in the household.
Yeah.
There's
no escaping. You can't walk away at the end of a shift. Like I'm able to walk away from, my social work job. Sort of, in theory.
Right. But I think that's another thing that's frustrating for especially caregivers, to be given advice on self-care, that bubble bath, for gosh sake, is it just makes us feel better to be able to say, oh honey, you should really be able to, take deep breaths and take a bubble bath and take care of yourself. It's a little bit like saying, why can't we all just get along? It's like, it's a little bit hollow.
Yeah. And part of that is, I think part of what stops people is this perception that to do self-care properly, you need big chunks of time. No, you don't. No, you don't. It can be doing the breathing, several times a day for 30 seconds. That's enough to keep those, the cortisol levels down. It's enough to make a difference. So yeah, I need to talk to myself about that too. I recognize that. But I think there's I did an exercise with a group of foster parents one time. And I'm going to invite anyone in the audience who struggles with self-care, and I'm going to go ahead and spend this chunket of time on it, simply because we are in the middle of the holiday season. And self-care typically goes out the window during the holidays. So I would invite you to grab a styrofoam cup from somewhere, maybe go buy a coffee at McDonald's and keep the cup. And then take a couple things, when you're at home near your sink, take a couple things that you can poke with. Like you might use the tip of a pen, right? It's very small, right? Or you might use the whole pen, but put holes in your cup in accordance with this set of instructions, right? Things that are not very stressful or not frequent in your life, you can put a hole near the top of the cup and then label it, what is the stress, and be mindful. Are you picking a small hole, or are you making it a big hole? And then the more stressful something is, or the more frequently it slaps you in the face, right? The more of a hindrance it is in your life, put those holes down closer to the bottom of the cup and label all of it with your pen, and then fill it up with water and see what happens. That old adage that you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, a lot of us don't think about what are the things that cause our cup to be empty. And it's a powerful little exercise. So I hope people will do it.
Thanks for that.
And when I have time, I'll go do it again myself.
It sounds like a really useful exercise to bring consciousness to
Yeah.
what is largely an unconscious process. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And, I think we're probably getting close to the time that we're winding down. So let me ask you.
We've got probably another 15 minutes
Okay,
before
great.
I need to jam.
Okay. Well, I am curious to know if there's any particular subject or representation from some part of the world that you have yet to interview that you really want to.
I've been meaning to get Jessica Birch on air. I think we've talked quite a bit. I don't think I've had her on as a guest. So, but I really enjoyed interacting with her for the book. So I'd love to get her on as a guest, and not only for her living experience, but she's also big in the advocacy space in Australia. She does do a lot of talks and presentations, and she's on advisory committees. Remarkable young lady. I'd love to have Ken Jones on back again. Susan Rich is coming back on again. I'm interviewing her on Friday.
Great.
Yeah, because we were so busy that we never got to talk about the thing that I reached out to her for in the first place. and that's how these conversations can go.
What was it that you were hoping to hear about?
So in talking with Natalie and a few other people, and a few local people that are raising kiddos and young adults on the spectrum, it seems to me that what a lot of parents experience is gaslighting from the medical community. That's their experience. Now, to truly be gaslit, and here's where, social media kind of changes the way words are used, right? To truly be gaslighting, the person doing it has to be intentionally causing psychological distress, right? Cruelty, to the point where their aim is to get the other person to to question their own reality. And I would say nobody in the medical community is going to do that. That's very much against their oath. But I also very much understand why it feels like that, and in the Lewy body community, in those dementia circles, I hear that a lot as well, the feeling of being gaslit. And I think it's a matter of, we all know those doctors that have egos the size of, the Incredible Hulk, and their staff will say things like, "Doctor, we'll see you now." Really? Doctor, that's his name? That cracks me up. When you get ignorance, right? The lack of knowledge about FASD and ego together, I think that equals the perception of patients that they've been gaslit. Because you have I don't know about it, therefore this isn't it. And how dare you question me, right? Yeah, you can very much feel that perception of gaslit. So that's why I had originally reached out to her, because I wanted to have a doctor to talk to about it. But given the fact that I just did talk about it, maybe I can just focus this next interview about her book, which is incredible. So, have you read her book yet?
The first one I did.
The silent epidemic.
Yes. Yeah. The death row one. Yeah.
And don't you just love this graphic? The umbilical cord wraps around and into the beer bottle, which is how the stork got the beer bottle from its neck, with going to the umbilical cord. of the baby.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to reach out for
So,
a little more of certain people like Ken
yeah,
Jones,
Ken and Susan.
and also the part about the gaslighting. Anything else
Yeah.
occur to you that you want to fill in any gaps?
I think I really just want to stay with my guiding philosophy in doing this podcast is I don't like it to ever feel like a formal interview. With these are the questions, you can take so long for your answers. But I want it to be conversational, and I want it to be candid conversations. I just want things to be very, very generic, or not generic. What's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of springing up on their own, and
Spontaneous?
yeah, see, word finding, that's another issue that we have. And occasionally I struggle with it. I actually find that I struggle with it more the older I get. But how much of that is FASD and how much of it is every low blood sugar you have kills more gray matter in your brain? So, yeah,
Well,
double whammy.
it's that right there is one of those central questions that I think we ask ourselves, and any of us who are doing any kind of coaching or counseling. It's the question that I'm dedicated to getting everybody to ask who does treatment for chemical dependency, for mental health, for juvenile delinquency, it's just to ask, how much of this difficulty was with you when you were a little kid?
Yeah.
And how much of it is getting worse either over time or after you started using, or after your schizophrenia symptoms started to come into being. But how much of this stuff with the memory and the distractibility and the word finding,
and how much is the core? Yeah.
How much of it, and to ask, to find out how much of it is core. One of the questions that I really wish everybody would start to ask is, when you were a little kid, like in school, did you have this, and this going on? Or was it something that has gotten like harder over time?
Yeah.
And then broach the subject of alcohol in the house, which maybe we all have our favorite ways of asking about that. And I'm curious to know yours. But mine has to be kind of general most of the time, which is, when you were a little kid, was there alcohol in your house?
Yeah.
And was it everybody, or was it just your dad?
And you just triggered something else for me, Kathy. When I podcasting, either as the host or as a guest, because I guest on as many as I can, because you can never have a big enough audience for a subject of this magnitude. In those conversations, I tend to get these revelations, right? Pieces kind of fall into place for me. And, it's really been a luxury having my mom here with me for almost 4 years. January 10 will be 4 years that she's lived here. In her more lucid moments, we go way back and talk about things from her childhood and generations past. And I've learned things in the last 4 years that I had not known for the previous 56 years, right? Such as, like, I've known for decades that she started smoking around 13. It really, riding on the back, sitting on the above the back seat, like with her legs dangling into the back seat of a convertible, going down the road, smoking a cigarette and getting a cigarette burn in a scarf. You know, it was like, that was an interesting picture to hold up against the mother that I thought I knew. So I had known that. But one of the other things that came out in the last, I don't know, 6 or 9 months, she recalls being a little girl, 4, 5, 6, going around the living room of her home, emptying the glasses that had, you know, from her parents' parties the night before, and just drinking them. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. Yeah, and then putting a lot of little snippets together. For instance, one of the things that can happen with fetal alcohol exposure, if the alcohol is consumed during the time that the jaws and the teeth are being formed, it causes a lot of issues. Like there's the higher need for orthodontia. There's the difficulty or the incomplete enamelization of the teeth, right, leading to sensitivity issues and spicy or savory foods being painful. You know, which is why a lot of kids, when they go from milk to food, all of a sudden they're picky eaters. It might not be that the food just tastes bad. It might be painful. We can also have too few teeth, too many teeth, or fused teeth, right? I was born missing 4 teeth, 4 molars. They were never there. My mom's brother had 4 extra. You know, the joke was he had my teeth. But, you know, as I'm thinking about it and putting 2 and 2 together, you know, my mom, I mean, she has more going on than I care to get into in this recording. But, you know, having that recollection of drinking at age 3, 4, 5, whatever, after her parents' parties, you know, my uncle having too many teeth. And it really makes me wonder how much of my grandparents' history had included alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And as you tell the story, I'm picturing a household where more than once there's a party that got so party-ish that there wasn't any cleanup until the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's glasses of alcohol sitting around. That's an environment that's, if you were a social worker, you'd be interested.
And neither of my brothers had ever heard this story.
If you were there, you would.
Yeah. Neither of my brothers ever heard that story. And I had never heard it until at some point this past year. But it really makes you go, what was going on back then?
Yeah.
You know, and I know there were a lot of dynamics going on. Like my mother's family had been very wealthy until the stock market crashed. They lost everything, but they had been wealthy. You know, she jokes her mom's side of the family had the money and her dad's side of the family had the brains. You know, like my great grandfather had a PhD at 16.
Wow.
So anyway, you know, it just kind of makes you wonder, you know, but then look at the era she was brought up during. She was born in 32. You know, she remembers the Depression and how much of a whooping they got for having a food fight with the tomatoes out in the garden and wasting the food. So, although it sounds like country fun, doesn't it? But yeah, so I mean, so there's been a lot of interesting things that have come out. You know, but that's the way it is for those of us who learn as adults that this is part of our journey. Is, you know, not everything filters into place all at once. You know, I think we only have those revelations as we're ready for them, as we're ready to incorporate that into our story.
Good point.
Because too much all at once would be overwhelming. And I think our mind would kind of protect ourselves from that happening. So,
Yeah. Good point.
yeah.
Good point. As I reflect on this series of podcasts, I sure wish that I could get into the heads of the people listening and watching to find out,
Yeah.
what has this meant to you? And so I'm gonna just sort of be a little pushy about this, Patti, and you can just edit me out. I think you could just take.
There's no editing, Kathy. I can't do it.
So let me just
spit it out.
Ask anybody who's listening and who is inclined to share your reflections and what it's brought for you and what has stuck in particular about this series and what you would like to hear more. I think would just be enormously interesting. Probably to you, Patti, certainly to me.
Yeah, and that is a very good point, and that's something that I've put a call to action out there occasionally for that, and I'm very, very serious about wanting people to contribute, because this show, it's not for me, it's not for you, it's for everybody out there who are listening every week, who are viewing every week, who want to learn more. If you're living with FASD, or you have experience in working with it, you want to come on the show, let me know, right? livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. For that discussion, Kathy, where you're wanting people to pipe up and share their experiences, then the Facebook group is perfect for that. So go to Facebook, go to the groups tab, put in the search, Living with FASD Podcast. Right? I kept the name pretty simple. So join the group and let's have a discussion based on this episode. Right? What is it that drew you to listen? What is it that you want to learn more about? What is it that this has touched for you? Have you had any pieces falling into place as you listen to this conversation? Are there any guests that you want me to get? I did have one person say, I want to learn more about the orthopedic issues. I'm still trying to figure out who to ask to get on the show to get that answered. I haven't forgotten you. So yeah, I would say, please join the group, give a holler. You can also leave comments on YouTube or Spotify. I don't know about the other platforms that I'm on. Spotify shares the audio files to Audible, Google, Pocket Cast. There's also the webpage Podcast Addicts. I think they somehow they include me. I don't know how. I didn't purposely share it to them, but there is somebody in the Flying with Broken Wings group that listens to it from that platform.
Oh, great.
So
great.
Yeah, I very much want as much engagement as possible. So to keep this relevant.
I don't think I've joined that Facebook group, but I will. Thank you for laying out all our options here.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's anything that we haven't gotten to that you want to before we're done. It has been so much fun interviewing you.
Oh, thanks.
I really appreciate your candor and your realness.
Well, I think in a lot of our regular conversations that aren't recorded, you remain very curious, about what makes me tick and how different aspects are brought out. And I think the one thing that this show has, one thing I've tried to highlight throughout the variety of people that I have on, is just how very multifaceted fetal alcohol spectrum disorders are. And I know that's a point that you tend to bring out again and again. And I think because people are whether you're a patient or a professional, we're so used to siloing everything into this little itty box, right? I know about this and it fits right here. But you can't do that with FASD. It is the hub, and all these other things are spokes, right? The ADHD, the autism, the oppositional defiant, the depression, the anxiety. I mean, they're all spokes off of FASD. It is so multifaceted, and it is biological. It is neurological. It is not our fault, right? And given the fact that this society embraces it and has embraced it for decades, it's not our mother's fault either. It's the alcohol's fault. You know, Susan put it very well in a subsequent LinkedIn post. Alcohol is a solvent. It is a solvent that we have managed to make taste good. Why would we purposely drink solvents? That's a very interesting question. You know, not being long past, you know, at 60, long past childbearing ages, you know, I still enjoyed alcohol every once in a while. And I haven't, the more I learn, I haven't touched it in a very long time.
Well, that
Very
right
long
there
time.
would be a really interesting podcast, Patti. The issue of,
Yeah.
is there such a thing as healthy drinking? And how do you define it? And
Yeah.
who defines it different ways?
Yeah.
And throw in there the effect of the alcohol lobby on suppressing information about fetal alcohol, which I understand there is some data.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, because I think the alcohol industry saw what happened to the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
And acted on that immediately so that they would not suffer the same fate. In terms of taxed out the wazoo in order to pay for the services that are needed because of the product. Yeah. I think that's
that they will.
I hope so. They need to. And I think that is a fantastic topic. And I think that also has the makings of a good panel discussion.
Yeah.
So I will task that to you to help me figure out who to have on that panel.
All righty.
Including yourself, of course.
And wouldn't it be nice if we could get somebody from the industry itself?
I wouldn't know how to even approach that, but it's worth giving a thought to. But for now, it is 7 minutes till, which means I have 7 minutes to get out the door and pick up a child I have an hour and 7 minutes to get a child to my office to supervise a visit with their birth parents. So
oh my gosh.
Run.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
To you, Patti. Goodbye to everybody. It was great fun. And looking forward to hearing responses, reactions, etc.
Yeah.
Okay,
so one more statement, and that's everybody remember to come back to the YouTube channel on Friday for another episode of Free Friday Tidbits. Come back next Monday for another episode of Living with FASD. Thank you so much for tuning in to this 6-month celebration of the Living with FASD podcast, and for just being the reason that these candid conversations are so enjoyable. Remember to email livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Be one of the first 3 people, and I will mail you a book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with People Diagnosed as Adults with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, or FASD, and join the Facebook group. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.